Enchiridion, or A Hand for the One-Handed, by George Webb Derenzy, Captain, HP 82nd Regiment. Magister artis ingenique largitor venter Perseus. Necessity is the mother of invention. 2. His Royal Highness Frederick Augustus, Duke of York, Commander-in-Chief, etc., etc., etc. Sir, the attention which your Royal Highness has invariably shown to the necessities and comforts of the British Army encourages me to offer to your Royal Highness's notice the following pages, illustrative of a set of instruments, to the invention and improvement of which I was originally induced to turn my attention by the inconveniences I found myself continually exposed to in my own person in consequence of the loss of my right arm at the Battle of Vittoria, and on the perfecting of which I have since bestowed considerable time, in the hope of enabling some of the numerous individuals who, from the chance of war or accident, may be in similar circumstances with myself, to derive the same benefit from the use of them that I have done. In bringing before your Royal Highness anything connected with the cause of humanity, I feel convinced that but little apology is necessary. It is this conviction which has emboldened me to intrude myself on your Royal Highness's notice, and I gladly avail myself of the opportunity it affords me to declare that I have the honor to be, with the most heartfelt zeal and attachment, most respectfully, your Royal Highness's devoted and obedient humble servant, George Webb Derenzy. 1st Robert Street, Adelphi, London, July 1st, 1821. Enchiridion. Innis sua gratia parvis. Lucan. Little things have their value. It has been justly observed that the real worth of anything is seldom known to the party who may be in actual possession of it. Mens sana in corpore sano, a sound mind in a sound body, is the greatest good that can fall to the lot of any human being. Yet it is granted to millions who are not conscious of any positive happiness from it. Let, however, calamity impair either the operations of the mind or the functions of the body, and their inestimable importance is immediately made manifest by the eagerness with which restoration to their original perfection is sought and would be purchased, even at the sacrifice of almost every worldly acquisition. Those who have the natural use of both their hands never pause amidst the various avocations of the day to reflect with gratitude on the services they derive from those members, by which man has so decided an advantage over the brute creation. But the moment that disease or accident may render one hand useless, the individual who sustains the loss is made sensible, in 1,000 painful instances of daily and inevitable occurrence, of the full use he had for two. I have learned this truth from the best of all teachers, personal experience, and I may indeed say, non ignara mali miseris succurrere disco. Under the sacred feeling, then, of that sympathy for the distressed, the promotion of which is doubtless one great end of all human suffering, I have been induced to devote a considerable portion of my time and thoughts to the contriving and perfecting of a set of instruments which shall enable the possessor of them to dispense with the attendance of a servant, or that attention from a friend, which would otherwise be absolutely necessary to supply to him those minute arrangements of neatness and economy, which the modes and refinement of social life render indispensable to personal comfort and appearance. I am aware that the scientific and the erudite may smile at the labor and invention which seem to exhaust themselves in the production of a machine to enable its possessor to brush a hat with one hand, and of another for mending a pen or filing the nails under similar circumstances. But the thousands who are subjected by the chance of war, the hazards of machinery, the effect of accidents, disease, or malconformation, to a loss of power on one side, will, I trust, receive with complacency any attempt to minister to their comforts. And fully shall I be repaid for the attention I have bestowed on the various articles described in the following pages, however trifling they may appear in themselves, to those who have no occasion for them, if I should be fortunate enough by their means to afford a hint to a single individual, which may enable him to pass his solitary hours with somewhat more pleasure to himself, or to join the social circle, unchecked by the fear of being obliged to tax the kindly feelings of some benevolent person in the party, for those attention which his own helplessness compels him to owe in general to the politeness of others. Having now made my preamble, I will proceed to the subject matter of my little volume, and as the affairs of the toilette stand first in the chronological arrangement of the events of the day, though not first in the scale of actual importance, I will begin with the explanation of the wash-hand tray complete. This is the largest article belonging to the one-handed apparatus. It is nevertheless sufficiently portable to be carried in a small traveling bag, as it is only a foot in length, 5 inches in width, and 1.5 in depth. It is made of mahogany, bound with brass, and is lined with tinfoil or lead paper to secure it from the moisture of the sponge which occupies the middle of it, as is seen in the engraving. On each side of the sponge is a nail brush, the position of which can be changed in a moment, as may be most convenient to apply the hand to them. The sponge is fastened down by 2 pieces of bone or ivory, which pass transversely from one side of the tray to the other, at each end of the sponge, making the middle of it firm, to rub the hand upon. On one side of the tray a space is left for the reception of a nail file, which shall be described in due course. It can be fastened in an instant into the place allotted for it, and enables a one-handed person to clean, pare, and file his nails with the utmost facility. The tray itself is attached to the dressing table by a pair of small plated clamps, which are represented in the engraving, and are too simple to require any further explanation. By means of a tray thus fitted up, it will be evident that a person who has either lost one hand entirely, or the use of it for a time, will be able to wash that which remains far better than any other person could do it for him. And the comfort and independence which I daily experience from the use of it are such that I cannot refrain from advising everyone who may be similarly situated with myself to lose no time in providing himself with this desirable auxiliary of cleanliness. My constant use of it has enabled me to make many improvements on the original invention, and I trust it will now be found one of the most convenient, as well as ornamental appendages that has ever been offered for the dressing room of any person who may require artificial aid. The second article, which I will describe, is an ivory vise of the common kind, only somewhat more than usually substantial. It will be found extremely useful on account of the number of purposes to which it may be applied, such, for instance, as holding a razor strop steady, or a letter firm, when it is to be sealed, or paper for the purpose of writing or drawing upon, as in all these respects it answers the purpose of a lead or marble slab. But it becomes of far more important use when the universal joint, or ball and socket, is attached to it. There is then scarcely any part of the day in which its utility is not called into action in some way or other. If I wish to cut my nails, it holds my knife firm for the purpose. If to make a pen or point a pencil, it receives my quill holder or pen nibbler. At breakfast, it enables me to eat an egg with comfort, by holding an egg cup in any direction I wish. By fixing my hat stick in it, I can brush or sponge a hat with as much ease as any two-handed valet could do it for me. And if I wish to conclude the evening with a rubber at whist, the vise, along with the ball and socket, enables me to place my card holder in such a manner as to enable me to play my cards with as much celerity as my partner, however impatient he may chance to be, can possibly desire. The principle of the ball and socket is so generally known and so fully appreciated in mechanics that it is unnecessary for me to enter into any elucidation of it in this place, as the accompanying engraving will be found to exemplify it quite sufficiently for my present purpose. But I cannot conclude my remarks on it without observing that its exceeding utility to a one-handed person is such that it may be justly termed the mainspring of the one-handed apparatus, particularly as the various instruments which it may be requisite to fix in the stem are so contrived that they may be put in or taken out in an instant, simply by pressing the thumb lightly on the outside of the spring, holding at the same time in the fingers the article intended to be removed. The spring itself is similar to those which trepanning instruments are generally applied to. For this most useful addition of the ball and socket to the vice, I am indebted to Mr. Oldham, of the Bank of Ireland, a gentleman distinguished for science and ingenuity. He suggested it to me shortly after my return from Spain, for the purpose of enabling me to make a pen, and I have since from time to time made additions to it, which have rendered it much more extensively useful. A lather box is the third article which I shall beg leave to mention, though I am aware it is by no means indispensably necessary to the operation of shaving, which indeed those who are tender-visaged may perhaps be enabled to perform with somewhat more of ease to themselves, by making the lather on their own chins, rather than within the box. But to those who have firmness enough of nerve or cuticle to bear the closest contact of the razor, I recommend the lather box, as much more cleanly and comfortable. It must have a joint fixed in the bottom of it, as is represented in the engraving, and that joint should be made to fit the stem of the ball and socket belonging to the ivory vise, by means of which it may be attached to the dressing table, and removed at pleasure. The simplicity of an article is so far from disparaging its utility that in general we may find those things from which we derive most use are of all others the least complicated in their arrangements. The lead cushion, represented above, will be found, simple as it may appear, useful in many instances to a one-handed person, such as in confining papers or letters in the same manner as the vise, when a gentleman wishes to write or draw, and is indeed preferable to the vise for such purposes, as the position of the article thus required to be confined can be changed in still less time. A cushion of this description, with the upper part of it covered with a piece of lint, which can easily be renewed when it becomes soiled, will be found a useful appendage to the dressing table, as by pinning a slip of paper across it, it will serve to receive the soap off the razor, whilst shaving, and afterwards by removing the paper and substituting a piece of linen rag to dry and polish the razor itself. The lead, which forms the base of the cushion, is about 4 inches in length, 1 in width, and half a 1 in thickness. A syringe may be classed among the usual appendages of the toilette. This, which is represented in the engraving, is the same as those in general use, excepting that it is somewhat shorter, in order that the water may be drawn up, and returned by it more easily with one hand. It has also a joint on the outside, in the middle of it, by which it may be applied to the stem of the ball and socket. This nail file will be found particularly useful, as the ease with which it can be applied in an instant by means of the small brass vise that accompanies it, as represented in the engraving, to the edge of the wash-hand tray, or to a table, will always enable a gentleman to shape his nails and keep them clean. Should any accidental circumstance oblige him to have recourse to it in the middle of the day, it will be found to take up very little room in the waistcoat pocket, if put into a case to guard it against the possibility of injury. The brass vise is made to fit into the stem of the universal joint, before described, by which means the file can be turned in any direction which may be deemed most convenient. By means of the boot hooks represented in this engraving, a one-handed person will be enabled to draw on his boots with more expedition than any attendant could do it for him. They are in every respect as portable and as convenient as those in common use. And though from the simplicity of their construction no other description of them is requisite than that which the engraving itself conveys, yet I deem it necessary to point out the utility of them, because notwithstanding their simplicity, and the great convenience resulting from the possession of them, I find that they are by no means so well known as they ought to be, among those to whom their assistance would be most useful. A slight improvement has been made on the original invention, by making the bar which is held in the middle of the hand somewhat stouter, so as not to hurt the fingers in drawing on the boots, if damp, or more than ordinarily tight. Having now gone through the operations of the toilette, I shall beg leave to conduct my readers into the breakfast parlour, where we will imagine the table properly furnished for that most social of all meals, and among other articles of refreshment, with eggs, a species of food to which travellers and military men in particular are so often indebted for allaying the feelings of hunger, when no other can be procured, that they naturally regard them with partiality. For my own part, I have almost as great a reverence for an egg as those ancient philosophers professed, who believed that the world itself came out of one. Few persons reflect on the wisdom of Columbus, by which he was led on to the discovery of another hemisphere, without associating it in their minds with the well-known story of his acuteness in challenging the nobles around him to make an egg stand perpendicularly on the table. Until I supplied myself with an egg-cup to my mind, I often wished that he had rather taught the art of eating it with one hand, as I continually found half of this desirable morceau elude all my endeavours to secure it with the spoon, owing to its turning round in the common egg-cups, and wanting altogether the firmness and occasionally inclined position necessary to allow of the shell being completely emptied. The egg-cup represented in the engraving is of silver, but plated ones look extremely handsome, and are of course more moderate in price. It is applied to the stem of the ball and socket, which is then fastened to the breakfast table, and allows the egg-cup to be inclined in any direction. The upper part of the egg-cup takes off, to admit of the egg being put in, and then, being fastened on again, it keeps the egg stationary, having an orifice at the top sufficiently large to admit the spoon. A more portable and less costly egg holder is represented in this plate. It is made of steel, attaches to the ball and socket when wanted, and when not in use, folds into so small a compass as peculiarly to fit it for the pocket of a traveller, under the circumstances of those to whom I am addressing myself. We will now dismiss the eggs, and with them the breakfast table altogether. Proceeding to the more serious avocations of the day, we naturally turn towards the writing desk, and here I hope I shall be enabled to do away some of the many inconveniences resulting from his loss, which to a one-handed person renders tedious and mortifying what is to others the most delightful of all occupations, that is, maintaining an intercourse with our friends, by epistolary communication, when deprived of the personal enjoyment of their society. The penknife represented in the engraving is furnished with a spring, by applying the thumbnail to which the blade slides in and out with ease, which renders it safer for a one-handed person than those commonly in use. It will likewise be found convenient in the pocket, as containing a comb and a turn-screw, and being marked on the outside at regular intervals, it will, when open, serve as a scale or measure of 6 inches in length. The quill holder is a very simple instrument, by applying which to the stem of the universal joint and ivory vise, and fastening the whole to the table, a pen may be made or mended, and a pencil pointed, by only one hand, with as much ease and expedition as if 2 were employed in doing it. The instrument must be placed on the defective side, so as to make the table a support for the arm. By putting a small tapered piece of ivory or quill into the pen, similar to that which is represented in the engraving, the pen may be nibbed very well with one hand. This operation, however, may be performed still more accurately by the pen nibber, here represented, which will be found as useful for persons of imperfect sight as for the one-handed. The nib of the pen is formed in a moment by placing it under the chisel, which is then pressed quickly upon it. Having provided for the pens and pencils, a ruler is the next object of consideration. This in the engraving above differs no way from that in common use, excepting in being made considerably heavier in order to enable it to resist the pressure made against it in drawing lines, and likewise to keep the paper steady, which will be still better done by placing the leaden cushion already mentioned upon it, and it may likewise be made useful in keeping open the leaves of a book. This engraving represents a steel vise, which will be found serviceable on many occasions, particularly to those who are fond of mechanical pursuits. It can be applied to the ivory vise at the underpart, or screw end, where there is a small brass socket to receive it, and which should be placed uppermost when this article is made use of. It is secured yet more firmly by a little thumb screw, which is represented in the engraving of the ivory vise. We will now presume the business of the morning within doors to be transacted, and that engagements abroad ensue. For this purpose we will suppose the hat requires brushing, an operation not very easy to perform with one hand alone, but with the assistance of the hat stick represented in the engraving above, it will be done with the utmost facility. In the center of this hat stick or stretcher is a joint which fits into the screw end, which in this case is placed uppermost of the ivory vise, and it is thus fastened to the edge of a table. The small brass socket and thumb screw mentioned in the preceding article hold it sufficiently steady for the purpose. The supporters, which screw into the hat stick on each side, are for the hat to rest on, and the crossbar is to keep them in their proper situation. When the hat is placed on these supporters, the stretcher can be lengthened or shortened by one hand without any difficulty, accordingly as it may be required. In case of getting wet, it will be found equally conducive to economy and comfort to be enabled by this simple contrivance to sponge a hat or rub it dry, without being obliged to wait for the assistance of another person. We will now turn our attention to the dinner table, a scene of action at which I believe most of my readers will agree with me it is particularly desirable that everyone should be able to shift for himself. And here I flatter myself that I shall be enabled to render an essential service to the one-handed by drawing their attention to the most perfect knife and fork which has ever been offered to the notice of persons so circumstanced. It will be seen by the engraving that the knife and fork form but one instrument. The knife is curved in the form of a cheese cutter, and terminates in 4 prongs, which act as a fork. It cuts by pressure, and as quickly as any other knife can accomplish, or as the most active gourmand can desire. 3 blades form a set. They are curved according to the hand for which they may be required, and the fork of one of them is plated so as to answer the purposes of a silver one. They are all made to fit the same handle, within which is a spring to hold them tight, and they can be changed with the utmost facility by slightly pressing on the table the end of the handle where the spring projects a little, holding at the same time the blade which is to be removed between the forefinger and thumb, in order to prevent its falling out upon the tablecloth. For portability, the handle and blades have a small red morocco case, which opens by the slight pressure of a spring, and thus a person who has only the use of one hand may sit down in any company with as much ease and independence as the rest of the guests. No fear lest dinner cool, who would otherwise be obliged to tax the politeness of his next neighbor for assistance. The dinner being thus provided for, we proceed to the dessert, in which there are few articles more favorable to the prolongation of social intercourse than nuts. In one respect, however, nuts are like jokes. To make them wholesome and palatable, every man should crack his own. To facilitate this operation for a one-handed person, there is only to add to a pair of the nutcrackers in common use a pivot such as is represented in the engraving, whereby it may be attached to the ball and socket, when fastened to the edge of the table, and thus it is rendered firm and convenient to the hand. Leaving the dining room, we proceed to the drawing room, where a social rubber at whist may be occasionally resorted to, by way of varying the amusements of the evening. Here the card holder above represented will be found as useful as it is simple and portable. It consists of 14 slips of silver or steel, which fold up and open out like a fan. It is fastened to the table by means of the ball and socket so often mentioned, because so often useful, and will be found to possess in perfection one quality very requisite in the game of whist, and that is of holding the cards in such a manner that they are not liable to be seen by any of the party, excepting the person to whom they belong. For the original idea of this little instrument I am indebted to Mr. Caslon in Burton Crescent. In the course of using it I have made a few improvements, which have rendered it complete as far as I can discover. Those who wish to possess one of a similar kind must be particular in giving directions that it should be made exactly like that which is represented in the engraving, as unless the slips of silver or steel be broader on the top than the bottom, they will not hold the cards properly. Having now gone through the articles which compose the one-handed apparatus, I shall, under the influence of the same, wish to serve my fellow-sufferers, which originally led me to the construction of them, beg leave to subjoin some remarks from which persons to whom the expense of keeping a servant on purpose to wait on them may be an object of serious consideration, can learn to do without any further assistance than what they will be enabled to receive from the instruments already described. The first thing on which I shall make my remarks is on the method of stropping a razor. If the strop be short, it must be placed at the edge of a dressing table and fastened with the ivory vise, which will hold it sufficiently secure to allow of the razor being passed over it with the utmost safety and dispatch. If the strop be such as is generally made use of, it will be sufficient to rest one end against the wall and press the other against the body, near the hip, on the perfect side, by which means the razor can be stropped with as much ease and as well as with the assistance of the vise. To dry the hand after washing, it is advisable to sit down and draw a towel across the knees, by rubbing the hand upon which it is quickly and comfortably dried. In regard to articles of dress, it may be observed that wherever strings can be done without, they ought to be avoided, as being tedious and difficult to tie. Thus in drawers there ought to be buttons and buttonholes, rather than strings, and on the defective side it will be found more convenient to have them button on the inside of the knee. For small clothes, buckles and straps are advisable, as also for shoes, particularly walking ones, and boots, though with regard to these latter, it is better for one-handed persons to wear such as require neither buckles nor strings. The sleeves of shirts for one-handed persons ought to be made longer at the vent of the wristband than usual, particularly those of nightshirts, but not longer in any other respect than is necessary. By having them made with a longer slit at the wrist, they can be easily turned up, by taking hold of the wristband with the teeth, and then pinning it to the bottom of the shoulder, so prevent the necessity of troubling any other person to turn them up, when about to wash the arm, or shave, in order to avoid wetting them. As the cravat has of late been a subject literally of no small importance in the consideration of professed students of the toilette, insomuch that the art of tying it has actually been made the subject of a treatise in itself, I trust I may be excused for addressing a few words on the subject to such one-handed persons as may be desirous of the comfort of neatness, though they may be far from aspiring to the renown of fashionists. The cravat must be folded in the usual manner, and placed on the back of the neck, with the ends hanging down at each side. The hand is then passed along the portion of cravat which hangs on the defective side, and which is next taken hold of by the teeth, at a little distance from the end, doubling it at the same time with the 2 forefingers and the thumb, in order that both the edges may be secured. The hand is then immediately put to the back of the neck, and the fingers take hold of the cravat near the off end of the stiffener, which is slipped towards the ear on the perfect side. This done, it is carefully passed under the chin to the opposite side, and round the neck to the perfect side, which is accomplished by passing the arm over the head and the hand round it. The cravat is then allowed to slip from the teeth, which, at the same moment and at the same side of the mouth, take hold of the other end to keep it in its proper situation, while the hand is drawing it tight, for the purpose of knotting it or pinning it. If a brooch or pin be used, it should be applied where the ends cross each other. The account of this process may give the idea of its being somewhat tedious or difficult. To make a thing understood, it must, however, be explained minutely. But any person who may practice the method here recommended will find that in a very few days he will be enabled by it to tie his own cravat as neatly and as expeditiously as the most accomplished valet could do it for him. To those who have lost the whole arm, it will be found very useful to have a loop of black ribbon fastened into the inside of the coat sleeve, near the shoulder on the defective side, and of sufficient length to allow of its being fastened to a button of the waistcoat, by which means the coat will be prevented from falling off at the shoulder, and may be worn open occasionally, as inclination may prompt. A small loop of ribbon also, strongly fastened to the cuff of the sleeve on the defective side, and appended to one of the buttons on the breast of the coat, will convert the sleeve itself into a safe and convenient pocket, wherein the handkerchief, or the case with the knife and fork, or any other small articles may be easily carried. I will now give another engraving, which represents a left hand holding a pair of snuffers, such as are in general use. I introduce it in this place in order to shew those who have lost the right hand, or are left-handed, how to snuff a candle neatly and expeditiously. There are left-handed snuffers made on purpose for those who may require them, but of course they are seldom found in the apartments of others. It is therefore much better to learn the simple method here recommended, and which the reader can more readily become acquainted with from looking at the engraving, than from any explanation that can be given of it. The representation given in this engraving of a watch wound up by only one hand is likewise so explanatory that it is scarcely necessary to say anything in addition to it. I will, however, remark that it is done by taking hold of the handle of the watch with the 2 middle fingers. The key is then taken up by the forefinger and the thumb, which place it in the keyhole and turn it without any trouble. A hunting watch, or one with the keyhole in the dial plate, is not well adapted for a one-handed person, as the interference of the crystal renders it tedious and difficult to turn the key. And now, having wound up the watch, which is generally the concluding operation of the day, I may be fairly allowed to wind up my subject, and to take leave of my readers with the agreeable hope that some of them, at least, will find themselves benefited by those suggestions which I have thrown out for their service, and which are the result of my own personal experience, of the advantage to be gained from them with regard to the 3 great requisites to the comfort of most persons, but to none more than to military men, which are cleanliness, economy, and, above all, independence. Prices of the articles in the one-handed apparatus as manufactured by J. Milliken, Surgical Instrument Maker, 301, Strand, London. 1. Wash hand tray, complete. £1, 18 shilling, 0 pence. 2. Ivory vice, ball and socket, etc. £1, 6 shillings, 0 pence. 3. Lather box, 3 shillings, 6 pence. 4. Lead cushion, 1 shilling, 6 pence. 5. Syringe, etc. 8 shillings, 6 pence. 6. Nail file, 1 shilling 6 pence. 7. File holder, 7 shillings 0 pence. 8. Boot hooks, 10 shillings 6 pence. 9. Plated egg cup, 7 shillings 6 pence. 10. Steel egg holder, 4 shillings 6 pence. 11. Penknife, etc., etc., etc. 10 shillings 6 pence. 12. Pen holder and ivory to nib the pen upon, 6 shillings 0 pence. 13. Pen nibber, 6 shillings 6 pence. 14. Heavy ruler, 4 shillings 6 pence. 15. Small steel vise, 7 shillings 0 pence. 16. Hat stick complete, 10 shillings 6 pence. 17. Knife and fork, etc. 1 pound, 1 shilling 0 pence. 18. Nutcracker, etc. 4 shillings 6 pence. 19. Card holder, 5 shillings 0 pence. A neat mahogany case for the above instruments. 1 pound. Total amount 10 pounds 4 shillings. Extra articles if required. A pair of steel clamps for the wash-hand tray, 4 shillings 6 pence. A pair of plated clamps for the wash-hand tray, 7 shillings 0 pence. A pair of nail brushes for wash-hand tray, 3 shillings 6 pence. A sponge for wash-hand tray, 10 shillings 6 pence. A tinned japanned case for wash-hand tray, 3 shillings 6 pence. A silver egg cup, 1 pound 14 shillings 6 pence. A steel blade and fork, 3 shillings 6 pence. A plated blade and fork, 6 shillings. A Morocco leather case for a set of knives, etc., etc., 4 shillings. A plated nutcracker, etc., etc., 9 shillings 6 pence. A plated card holder, 18 shillings 6 pence. The end.